want to see a show of hands of any people who've never had a problem with feeling gratitude. I thought so. I'm one of those people myself, and I told someone recently, if I have a mission at all as a minister, that mission is for me to help other people feel okay. And that I'm okay. And we've all been through a lot of stuff. And I've been through a lot of stuff. Most recently, some of you know, I got hit with a connective tissue disorder in May of 2016. And my shoulders locked up, my hips locked up, my hands swelled up 3 times the size and went into claws and stayed there. And I was in horrific pain, so I am full of gratitude to be a walking miracle here today. I haven't had on church clothes, as we call them in the South, in a year and a half. So everything's too big. And by the time I finish this talk, you might think I'm too big for my britches, as my mama would say. It's interesting about gratitude that we're usually introduced to it in childhood at the dinner table when some parent or older person says to us, eat your peas and be grateful because there are children starving in China or wherever. This is a terrible thing to put on a child responsibility that they don't eat their peas that somebody else could have. Then it's just a terrible thing. Even turns into battles. An allergic child instinctively knows its body is screaming, "Don't eat that!" But he also or she also needs the approval of the parents. And sometimes it becomes a battle at the dinner table. And it can also lead to eating disorders. But the point is that if you're introduced to gratitude in this kind of manner, you wind up with all these nasty feelings that are part of this ball of feelings. It might be that you start to feel gratitude for something and immediately these feelings come up. How many of you have trouble receiving a compliment? Where do you think that comes from? You know, where does that come from? A lot of this talk is going to be stuff you've heard before in other ways, but as a writer and a professional speaker and teacher, I know that sometimes it takes a while hearing things in different ways, even though we're talking about the same time, for the light bulb to go off. And it might go off in a different way. It might be a different color. It might be a different facet of the same concept that you haven't taken in before. When I was in Boise, my family happened to go to this really hippie, funky coffee shop that's fairly near Boise State University. And in this coffee shop, that has a reputation for the great coffee and great baked goods and so on, they have this really hippie-like gift shop. And I was looking around, and I was absolutely delighted to see a coffee mug with the image of Buddha on it in the traditional meditative sitting pose. And underneath it, it said, "Get rid of that shit." And I thought, that is exactly the first step to living a life that smacks of gratitude. So Carol's going to give you a handout, and I have made that little image of the Buddha with that written right under it at the top of the page. So we're going to kind of follow along, and this way you'll have it later and you can write down different things that you might want to remember. I just put things down that came to me as part of this process, and I left room where your own instincts of what you need to work on and get rid of can be placed there. And one of the ways I want to help you understand that you're okay is to share some of my own personal experiences. And there are some you will relate to and some you will not. One of the first things we have to get rid of is family secrets. I grew up in a family that had many secrets and a terrifying feeling of allowing those secrets to be known. I had a cousin who stole money from his adoptive parents who were elderly and ill, and he went on to steal money from the county EMS group that he led, and he wound up in prison for doing that. I had another cousin in prison who killed his grandfather with a baseball bat. The guy had been extremely abusive from the time Tony was very small. And in prison, Tony climbed up on top of a building and jumped off and killed himself. So those are some of the skeletons in my closet. I did genealogy to a certain extent and talked to some, my mother, my aunt, and a cousin, and found out a family secret my aunt told, which made my mother very upset, was that my grandfather, Elliot, actually deserted from the Navy. He had heard that his unit was going to France, and he was basically a country boy. He knew nothing about any of that and going overseas. His father, who was Native American, knew a lawyer who was able to get him out of the service, able to stay home and help with the family and the farming. And my mother was so upset, and she said a lot of boys did that back then. Of course, there were the awful things like child abuse, sexual abuse, etc. So I'm standing up here telling you that if you come from a situation like that, you too can at least get to a point of having gratitude in your life. And I have a lot of gratitude in mine. Self-protection. Many of us have been hurt either through romantic relationships, family relationships, things at work, whatever. We all have baggage, but the good news is that baggage can be unpacked. When you want to share your secrets, please be careful with whom you share them. I had a friend new to religious science, this happened many years ago, who had been molested by her father. This was their family secret. And she decided she was going to confront her mother about this. Well, my friend at that time was living with her mother. Her marriage had broken up many years ago, and job situations had changed and so on, and she was living with the mother. Needless to say, some people don't deal well with this type of thing. It's been shoved under the carpet for a very long time, and my friend's mother threw her out of the house. We have several ministers associated with this congregation, and we have practitioners who are licensed and trained to listen and pray with you and keep things confidential. But the truth is that if you bury your past and you keep it buried, it will cause you problems and in some cases even illness. Some of you may have heard of Phineas P. Parkhurst Quimby. How many people have heard of him? Awesome, wonderful. Dr. Quimby is actually the father of New Thought. And he is the person who basically, we believe, rediscovered how Jesus healed people through a specific type of prayer that we call prayer treatment. And you can learn how to do that by taking classes. You can learn how to do it for yourself and other people to help facilitate their healing and your healing. Superstitions were a big part of my family too. And I could spend half of this talk telling you the superstitions I grew up with. The one I want to share with you, I was exposed to when I was a very small child, somewhere probably in the age of 5 to 6, 8. And the female members, my mom and her sisters, and possibly one of my grandmothers, all got together and they were going to the cemetery to tend the family plot. Well, I and my probably younger sister went along, and we were just kind of there, as kids sometimes are. And I innocently picked up a dried or artificial flower that had blown off some other grave. I was instantly reprimanded. Do not take anything from a cemetery or you will be bringing back one of your own. Can you imagine the fears and the irrational things that I wound up with as a young adult and adult? I wound up with agoraphobia, which people think is the fear of closed-in places or whatever, but actually it is the fear of the symptoms of fear. So is it any wonder that we as children, being impressionable like a piece of clay, wind up with this SHIT clinging to us as we move through life? Some of us pretty it up, or try to, or ignore it, or shove it aside. but you do not get to a place of living a life that smacks of gratitude unless you unload your baggage. And for God's sakes, get rid of this idea of sin. This has made more people sick than I can, even imagine. The Bible is a wonderful thing. But, I have had 4 college classes in Old Testament, New Testament, and then I have an additional class in world religions. On the first day of the first class I ever had in Bible at Presbyterian College in South Carolina, my professor said, do not ever take anything out of the Bible and try to prove something with it. People are always doing this. And unless you understand the times of the Bible, the historical references, the culture of the ancient Jews and the culture around them, which they really stole from and stuffed into their own little bag of tricks, they were creating a race. And so they pull from all over the place. It might surprise some people. It certainly would surprise a lot of Christians that I know, that there are probably 7 different versions of the flood story. But now we're discovering from all the archaeology that's being done all over the world, there's many more than that. So it didn't just happen to the Jews. So it was something that happened that made a big impression on a lot of people. But back to the idea of sin. As I put on your handout, originally sin, the word used in Aramaic or whatever, where this all started, was an archery term that simply meant missing the mark. But how many people have made themselves horribly ill worrying about the fact that they believe or suspect that they believe, or they are worried that they might have committed the unpardonable sin that is mentioned in the Bible? Nobody knows what the heck that means. Nobody. And if anybody tells you they do, they're crazy. My favorite verse from the Bible is, today I lay before you a blessing and a curse. Now, why on earth would that be my favorite Bible verse? For one thing, it's a riddle. The ancient Hebrews and all were very fond of riddles. If you don't know that about the Bible, then some of the stuff that you're reading and thinking that you understand, I don't think you do. Okay? Today I lay before you a blessing and a curse. It means the same thing. God gives us everything. You decide whether it's a blessing or it's a curse. And depending on how you decide, everything else follows from that. Sin, or missing the mark, is an opportunity to grow. If you don't learn that the stove is hot, you may burn down the house. But even if you burn down the house, you can build a new one. There are very few mistakes that you make in this life that you can't move out of, grow from, and even do other things that are even better. Jean mentioned the news, the hurricanes, and so on. My son-in-law is still in Texas working with FEMA to do applications from Puerto Rico. They had 40,000 applications that were filled out incorrectly. Can you imagine what a nightmare this has been with a phone service that goes in and out, people losing electricity, and so on? But my son-in-law has expressed that these people are so grateful for any help, any assistance that they can have. When you see these people on the news, their house just burnt down, they've lost every blooming thing they have. Out of the mouth of some of them will come, I have my life, I have my family, we can rebuild. That's a life that smacks of gratitude. Unfortunately, sometimes we don't get there until we start losing our stuff, including emotional baggage. But now I'm talking about stuff. Many of you know that I have moved around, I've forgotten how many times over the last 11 years. And when you're constantly moving and moving in with other people, you have to let go of stuff. They don't want it hanging around. You don't want to have to pay to move it. So when I moved back to Albuquerque in May from my sister's house where I had to fly to recover, I shipped 9 boxes back to Albuquerque. I still had a bunch of stuff in Boise, but most of the furniture that I had moved up there was gone. We had yard sale after yard sale. So I could store the rest in my daughter's cubbyhole under her stairs and bins in her garage. So when I went up there, I went through it yet again, trying to get rid of more and more stuff. It's been my privilege to stay with 2 ladies since I moved back. The first one was a hoarder. I had no idea when I accepted the invitation to stay with her. And it was so bad that in one of the bedrooms, literally, there was this much room to walk. The person that I'm staying with now is absolutely a wonderful person. And she's about 85, 86 years old. And she's going that way, okay? One of the most difficult and exhausting experiences I've had over the last 11 years was having to clean out my mother's house and my mother and daddy's barn. My dad passed about 11 years before my mother did. I spent 6 hours of my life burning old checks all the way back to the 1930s. None of us here are really spring chickens. Do not do this to your children. And my mother was one of the most fantastic house cleaners ever, and she did not have a lot of clutter. When they got something, they appreciated it and they kept it, and she kept it in really good condition. But there were things like that, those checks and papers and just things you just thought, why in the world would anyone keep this? Well, there's an attitude in the South that you keep it because you might need it. And that applies to old plumbing parts, pieces of wood, The insides of washing machines that are 50 years old, old mattresses. I mean, the barn was the thing. This all goes under the heading of stupidity. The other big one that's under there is I am statements that do not work in your life. Here's something you do need to know in the Bible. Moses with the burning bush says, basically, who the heck are you? And the voice says, I am that I am. I am that I am. Excuse me. That is an equation. In Buddhism, I think it is, the phrase is, I am that. I am everything. And the power of God that we use as New Thoughters and Christians who learn how to use it, and other people who do from other religions, is in the Word. The power is in the Word. In the Gospel of John, it starts out, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Word includes your thoughts. When you say, I am sick, that is an equation. I am producing sickness. Almost every day that I went through this disorder and that I'm still recovering from, I said, I am better in every way, every day. I am better every day in every way. That was when my hands were still like this, my shoulders were still locked up, I was in pain, but I became better every day in every way. Now I can type those racy books. Whoops. I am working on the second one and hope to have it published by Christmas. Be very careful about loose thoughts. Not everything replicates, but what you focus on and put your power behind, we call it the juice, the passion, the fire, into that I am statement, it will often manifest. So quit telling yourself you're worthless. Quit telling yourself that you're sick. One of the biggest problems in getting rid of our shit is in the I category, and that is inertia. Not making a decision is making a decision. Whether it's to sit on the couch and do nothing and let your time go by, or whether it's to get up, take a walk, pray, do something that matters to you, that you have a passion about. Don't be on the fence. Don't be afraid of making a mistake. We can always learn from it. hesitation. I know people who literally stayed in horrible relationships because they just didn't think they had the power to change anything. As a bereavement counselor, I had to call people, family members, who were connected to our patients. And I remember calling this lady one time, and the patient was her estranged husband, who had asked her for a divorce. And it became very clear as I talked to her that she hated his guts. But she decided that because she was Catholic, she was not going to give him a divorce. Please. This lady decided, because of either fear, revenge, hatred, that she was going to keep both of them living in hell. That's another thing you need to unload. Hatred of any kind. That goes along with judgment. If you still react to road rage situations, somebody cutting in front of you, landscape rage, which we've heard about on the news lately, there's still anger, there's still hatred inside of you. And it's coming out at that second. Once you unload all your baggage, you can then live in the now, which is the second step of learning to live a life that smacks of gratitude. When I was in Boise, my companion and I, my ex-husband, liked to go to the library on Sunday and get videos to watch and books to read and so on. And it was a little chilly, and we were waiting for it to open on the Sunday afternoon. And there were other people standing up in front of the library. We stayed in the car because of my condition, and I wasn't going to get out yet. So we people watched. And so this group of people were up there in front of the library, and they were all standing around like this. Every one of them. One man had the cutest Shar-Pei dog on a leash. He was so cute. Nobody looked at him. Nobody tried to touch him, pet him. Nobody looked at the beautiful blue sky. Nobody looked at the leaves that were falling. Another group showed up, and a couple of members from the first group joined that group out in the parking area, or the road area in front of the library. And within seconds, they'd made a circle, and all of them were doing this. Pretty soon, a woman, a young mother, and probably her son, about maybe somewhere between 6 and 8, came up, and they had this cute little black and white Sheltie dog on the leash, and both of them had a ball. And my companion, my ex-husband, volunteers at the Boise Art Museum, which is across the street. And he was telling me there's a sculptor of some renown who has created a work that is all these people standing around like this. How can you feel gratitude if you're not even aware of living in the present? I'm not saying that technology is bad. It can, like everything else that is neutral, we can decide if it's a blessing in our lives or a curse. But I think it's becoming a curse in a whole bunch of people's lives, and they don't realize it. It is one of the biggest time wasters or suckers out there. The other thing that struck me working in hospice is that time is valuable. You don't get any of it back. Reincarnation may be real or not, but not like Groundhog Day. We don't get to relive any moment that we've expended. So, please stop wasting your life looking at junk mail, junk posts on the internet, all these things. My personal guru, Sai Baba, said that even leaving the electric lights on is wasting God. Think of that. How much of God are you wasting doing this? A lot of us do not allow ourselves to live in the now because we still are so attached to the past. And we use these things as escaping our own thoughts and our own feelings. And they can be just as deadening as taking heroin or overprescribed drugs or sugar addiction or any of that. In fact, that causes a huge amount of stress. Over 30% of teenagers who are plugged in all the time are already showing signs of anxiety. They get hit with 24/7 criticism. They can't take it, but they're so addicted to finding out what people are saying about them or who, they can't seem to shut it off. If you have kids, grandkids, please inform them that people who say nasty stuff over the internet hate themselves, and they are simply looking for a target for that hate. It has nothing to do with them. I had that talk with my granddaughter before I left Boise. Sometimes living in the now can seem very scary when you're suddenly confronted with reality. Have you had that sort of experience? Maybe you're driving down the road and you're thinking about something else, which you shouldn't be when you're driving, but happens to us all. And then suddenly something wakes you up. That can be the feeling of trying to live in the now when you've lived in the past for so long. In divinity school, I was given this exercise where I had to go out in the backyard and sit there, and I had to write down everything I heard, everything I saw, everything I smelled, to reconnect my senses to the now. We're not going to do that here today, but I've provided how you do that in your handout. It's a great way to kind of reconnect with what's here. So many of us are like those people standing around there in front of the library. Heaven knows we live in one of the most beautiful places on earth. But how many times have you stopped and looked at the sandias and realized that what you're seeing changes by the minute, by the hour? I always wanted to do a book where I had a stationary camera on the sandias that took shots all day long for a whole year. And then I would pick out 365 of how it was different. When was the last time that you spent 15 minutes looking at a sunset? And heaven knows we are gifted with sunsets that people in other places would never even believe. We must become aware for our emotions and feelings of gratitude to show up. One of the things that a lot of people talk about in New Thought and other religions is becoming enlightened. You can take that to mean whatever you want to. What I take it to mean is focusing on the good, which is God. When you focus on the good, then you start emitting light from within. We say shine a light on it. There's another Bible verse that says, choose this day whom you shall serve. Will you serve the good? Will you serve God? You can take that to mean whatever you want it to mean. We're all on our different paths. Your meaning is just as valid as mine if it does not cause harm to self or others. Please don't call anything that causes harm to self or others as spirituality. The final thing that I want to talk about on your handout is learning to rest. We've all heard that thing about God making the world in 7 days or 6 days, and then he rested. Woohoo! How many of you are constantly busy to be busy? How many of you believe that you won't have enough time to finish what you want to finish? We have an affirmation in New Thought, which is there's enough time to get done whatever needs to be done. And that is very true if you don't waste it. Time may not be real, as some scientists say, but we all live as if it were, and we all have a 24-hour system in which we wake up, we do our thing, and we go to sleep. Some of us have a problem, and I'm one of them, that I want to be doing all the time. It's not good for me. It's not good for you. And you can choose what your rest is. You can choose prayer. You can choose to sit to read and contemplate what you read. You can watch something on television that is helpful or entertaining to you. I'm certainly not going to judge what you watch because I don't care whether you judge what I watch. But I watch what I watch because it touches me for some reason somewhere. But learn to rest. It's hard to find gratitude if you are buzzing around all the time. Gratitude will come naturally as breathing if you get rid of your past. And I don't mean you forget it. Getting rid of it means that you take the emotional charge off of it. All of us have PTSD to a certain extent who have gone through stuff. But when you take the emotional charge of it off of that, peace will start to come in. Rest will start to come in. Awareness will start to come in. And at that point, you wake up to something. I've been thinking about gratitude for weeks now and discussing it with other people, and in the middle of the night, Spirit sent me a definition that I like very much. And it was the overwhelming feeling of being part of something greater than yourself. The overwhelming feeling of being part of something greater than yourself. When you're standing in front of that sunset and your heart goes, and you feel that connection, that smacks of gratitude. When you laugh, that smacks of gratitude. When you love, even though you've been hurt, you risk love again, that can smack of gratitude. Risk love again, and most of all, risk loving yourself. When I was in Boise, I read a humongous biography of the Duke of Wellington. And for those of you who do not know, the Duke of Wellington basically single-handedly saved Europe and Great Britain from Napoleon. And he was much loved by his country, as you can imagine, although that went up and down depending on what politics was. But he was much, much loved. And when he died, he had a funeral you would not even believe. But his son, afterwards, the second Duke of Wellington, wrote to somebody. Imagine when the Duke of Wellington is announced and I show up, how the people are disappointed. When I worked in hospice, I learned that some men will die before their father did, in terms, say their father died at 56, they will die at 55. Because they do not believe they are worthy to live longer than their father. And if you think I'm making this stuff up, I'm not. Some people can really determine their death. They will not die if there's family in the room. They will not die if anybody's in the room. But I have had patients who have had horrendous diseases, who were in such a state of gratitude. But the telling thing was that they had lived a life that smacked of gratitude. Thank you so much.